They left me to die in Kandahar with a bullet in my chest and shrapnel in my leg, then built a Pulitzer Prize on the fiction of my heroic death. For 3 years, I've been planning my resurrection, and today I'm going to destroy the careers they built on my blood. My name is Michael Cross, and I'm supposed to be dead. The obituary in the Washington Herald called me a fearless correspondent who paid the ultimate price for truth. The Pulitzer Committee praised my extraordinary courage in the face of mortal danger when they awarded the prize to my former colleagues for their groundbreaking coverage of the Afghanistan conflict made possible by the sacrifice of their fallen teammate. What they don't mention is that those same colleagues, Sarah Chen, Marcus Rodriguez, and David Walsh, abandoned me in a Taliban ambush to save their own skins, then fabricated the story of my death to cover up their cowardice. They turned my near murder into their career-making moment, and for 3 years, the journalism world has celebrated them as heroes while I've been rotting in obscurity, planning my revenge. Today, that planning ends. I'm sitting in the lobby of the Herald building, watching through floor-to-ceiling windows as the city wakes up around me. In my briefcase are photographs, video files, witness statements, and documentary evidence that will expose not just the cowardice of my former team, but the massive story they buried to protect themselves. Evidence of American war crimes that could have ended careers in Washington if it had ever seen print. Sarah Chen is now the Herald's foreign correspondent bureau chief, her rise meteoric after the Pulitzer. Marcus Rodriguez parlayed his Afghanistan coverage into a book deal and CNN contract. David Walsh left journalism entirely, using his newfound fame to launch a successful consulting firm advising corporations on crisis management. All of them built their success on the lie of my death, and today, I'm going to tear it all down. The story begins 5 years ago in a forward operating base outside Kandahar, where our 4-person team was embedded with the 82nd Airborne. We'd been in country for 6 weeks, following a story about civilian casualties from drone strikes that kept getting more complicated the deeper we dug. What started as a routine investigation into collateral damage numbers became something much darker when we uncovered evidence that some strikes were being called in on targets that commanders knew contained non-combatants. We had internal communications, leaked drone footage, testimony from soldiers who'd refused to participate in what they considered war crimes. It was the kind of story that ends military careers and brings down administrations. It was also the kind of story that gets journalists killed when the wrong people decide the truth is too dangerous to publish. Sarah was the team leader, a veteran correspondent with 15 years of war zone experience. Marcus handled video and photography while David worked sources and handled the technical aspects of our communications with the Home Office. I was the researcher and secondary writer, the newest member of the team but the one who'd developed most of our key sources. The night before everything went wrong, we were in our shared quarters reviewing the final evidence package we'd assembled. Sarah was nervous, more nervous than I'd ever seen her in 6 weeks of rocket attacks and convoy runs. "This story could destroy the entire chain of command," she said, scrolling through the leaked communications on her encrypted laptop. "We're talking about generals, Pentagon officials, maybe even the Secretary of Defense." "That's exactly why we have to publish it," I replied. "How many civilians died because these assholes decided their careers were more important than following the rules of engagement?" Marcus looked up from his camera equipment. "Mike's right. This is what we came here to do." But David was shaking his head. "You're not thinking about the bigger picture. If we publish this, it doesn't just hurt a few generals. It undermines the entire war effort, gives ammunition to everyone who wants us to pull out immediately." "Maybe we should pull out immediately," I said. "Maybe that's what this evidence is telling us." The argument continued for hours, but by morning, we seemed to have reached consensus. Sarah would file the story with our editor back in D.C., and we'd deal with whatever consequences came from publishing it. It was, after all, why journalists existed, to tell the truth regardless of who it made uncomfortable. I should have recognized the signs that my colleagues were having second thoughts. Sarah's unusual quietness during morning chow, Marcus's reluctance to hand over his memory cards containing the most damaging video evidence, David's suggestion that maybe we should sit on the story for a few more days to make sure we had everything right. But I was young and idealistic, still believing that journalism was about truth rather than career advancement. I didn't understand that my 3 colleagues had already calculated the cost-benefit analysis of publishing our story versus burying it, and decided that their careers were worth more than the truth. The ambush happened during what was supposed to be our final interview, with a former Afghan National Army translator who'd witnessed American forces calling in a strike on a wedding party. We were meeting him in a compound about 2 kilometers from the base, a location Sarah had chosen because it was secure and private. Later, I would understand that Sarah had chosen it because it was isolated enough that whatever happened there wouldn't have witnesses. The interview was just getting started when the first RPG hit the building's outer wall. The explosion threw all of us to the ground, and in the chaos that followed, the crack of AK-47 fire, the shouts in Pashto, the smell of cordite and burning wood, I made the mistake of trying to grab our equipment instead of immediately running for cover. That's when the second RPG came through the window. The explosion threw me across the room and into a concrete wall. I felt my ribs crack, felt the warm spread of blood across my chest, felt shrapnel tear through my left leg. But I was conscious, and I could see my colleagues scrambling for the door. "Help me!" I shouted, trying to drag myself toward them. "Don't leave me!" Sarah looked back once. For just a moment, our eyes met across the smoke-filled room. I saw her make the calculation. The risk to herself versus the trouble of helping a wounded colleague who might slow down their escape. Then she turned and ran. Marcus and David followed without even looking back. They left me bleeding on the floor of a building under attack by Taliban fighters, took our equipment, and disappeared into the Afghan countryside. I should have died in that room. I would have died if not for Rashid, our interpreter, who crawled back into the building despite the ongoing firefight and dragged me to safety in a back room where we waited out the attack. When American forces finally responded to the distress call, they found me unconscious from blood loss, and Rashid dead from a bullet to the head. He died covering my body with his own when the Taliban fighters came looking for survivors. My colleagues were found 3 hours later at a checkpoint 5 kilometers away, claiming they'd been separated from me during the attack and couldn't get back to help because of enemy fire. They said they'd seen me fall, that they'd tried to reach me but were forced to retreat when the building caught fire. They were heroes who'd narrowly escaped death while trying to save their colleague. I was the tragic casualty, the dedicated journalist who died pursuing the truth. Except I wasn't dead. I spent 2 months in a military hospital in Germany, recovering from my injuries and trying to process what had happened. The official report classified the attack as a Taliban ambush targeting American journalists. My colleague's story was accepted without question. After all, why would anyone doubt the account of traumatized survivors? But I knew the truth. They hadn't tried to save me. They'd abandoned me to die, and then they'd used my supposed death to become heroes. The real betrayal came when I learned what happened to our story. While I was fighting for my life in a German hospital bed, Sarah, Marcus, and David were back in Washington briefing our editors about their harrowing experience in Afghanistan. They submitted a package of stories about their time embedded with American forces, focusing on the courage of individual soldiers and the challenges of fighting an insurgency. They buried the war crime story entirely. All the evidence we'd gathered, the leaked communications, the drone footage, the testimony from whistleblowing soldiers, disappeared into the digital equivalent of a filing cabinet. Sarah told our editors that the sources had dried up after the attack, that the evidence was too fragmentary to support publication, that it would be irresponsible to publish unsubstantiated allegations against American military personnel. What they published instead was a series of human interest pieces about American soldiers far from home, Afghan interpreters caught between two worlds, and the tragic death of their colleague Michael Cross, who died trying to tell the story of war's human cost. It was powerful journalism, masterfully written and deeply moving. It was also a complete fabrication designed to hide their cowardice and protect their careers. The Pulitzer Prize committee ate it up. When I was finally well enough to make contact with the outside world, I discovered that Michael Cross was dead, that his colleagues were being celebrated as heroes, and that the story we died for, that Rashid had actually died for, would never see the light of day. I tried to contact Sarah first, thinking that surely there had been some misunderstanding, that she would want to know I was alive and ready to continue our work. She hung up on me. Marcus changed his phone number. David's assistant said he was unavailable and would remain so indefinitely. My own newspaper, the paper I'd worked for 8 years, informed me through a lawyer that any attempt to contact current employees or contradict previously published accounts of events in Afghanistan could result in legal action for defamation. They'd written me out of history, and they were prepared to keep me erased. So I disappeared. Michael Cross stayed dead, and I became someone else entirely. I grew a beard, gained 40 pounds, changed my appearance enough that casual recognition would be unlikely. I moved to a small town in Montana, took a job at a weekly newspaper, and began the slow process of rebuilding a life while planning my revenge. For 3 years, I've been gathering evidence, not just about the ambush, though I have plenty of that, including testimony from soldiers who were at the base that night and security camera footage that contradicts my colleagues' timeline. More importantly, I've been reconstructing the war crimes story they buried. Most of our original sources are still in Afghanistan, still angry about what they witnessed, still willing to talk to a journalist who promises to actually publish their accounts. The leaked documents are still out there, still available to someone who knows where to look. The drone footage still exists in Pentagon servers, still accessible to someone with the right contacts and the right motivation. I've spent 3 years becoming that someone. But evidence alone isn't enough for the kind of revenge I have planned. Exposing Sarah, Marcus, and David as cowards who abandoned a colleague would damage their careers, but it wouldn't destroy them completely. They could claim confusion in the heat of battle, express regret for their mistakes, and probably survive with their reputations somewhat intact. That's not good enough. They need to fall as completely as they tried to make me fall. Which is why I've spent the last 6 months positioning myself to become their worst nightmare. A dead man with a story to tell and nothing left to lose. The first phase of my plan was getting hired at the Herald under my new identity. It wasn't difficult. I'd changed my appearance enough to avoid recognition, and my work at the Montana Weekly had given me a solid portfolio under my assumed name. The Herald was expanding their investigative team, and they were impressed enough with my clips to offer me a position. I've been working 3 cubicles away from Sarah Chen for 2 months. She walks past my desk every morning, completely oblivious to the fact that the colleague she left to die is sitting right there, planning her destruction. The second phase was rebuilding relationships with my old sources and developing new ones. It turns out that being presumed dead has certain advantages when it comes to investigative journalism. Sources are more willing to talk to someone who officially doesn't exist, and there are fewer concerns about retribution when the journalist isn't supposed to be alive anyway. The war crimes story I've reconstructed is even more damning than what we had 5 years ago. I have testimony from 37 soldiers, leaked documents from 12 different operations, drone footage of 4 separate incidents, and internal Pentagon communications, showing that the civilian casualty problems were known at the highest levels of command. I also have something my colleagues didn't have 5 years ago. Audio recordings of conversations between Sarah, Marcus, and David in the weeks after they returned from Afghanistan, discussing how to handle the Michael situation, and whether their story about the ambush would hold up under scrutiny. Marcus's wife, it turns out, has been recording his phone calls for years as part of a messy divorce proceeding. She was happy to share the recordings with an investigative journalist looking into her ex-husband's career, especially when that journalist offered to pay her legal fees in exchange for the audio files. The recordings are devastating. They show my former colleagues discussing how to maintain their version of events, coordinating their stories to avoid contradictions, and, most damningly, laughing about how my death had actually improved their career prospects by making them the sole survivors of a heroic mission. "It's better this way," Sarah's voice says on a recording from 2 weeks after they returned. "Mike was always too idealistic. He would have insisted on publishing that war crimes bullshit and gotten us all blacklisted." "The Pulitzer Committee loves a good tragedy," Marcus responds. "Dead journalist is way more compelling than living whistleblower." They're right, of course. My death was worth more to them than my life ever was. But now it's time to show them what resurrection looks like. The third phase of my plan begins today, when I walk into the morning editorial meeting and present my latest investigative piece to the assembled staff. It's a story about journalistic integrity, war correspondence ethics, and what happens when reporters abandon their colleagues and bury inconvenient truths. It's also the story of how 3 celebrated war correspondents built their careers on the lie of a colleague's death, and the suppression of evidence of American war crimes in Afghanistan. Sarah is already in the conference room when I arrive, sitting at the head of the table in her role as bureau chief. Marcus is there too. He's been consulting for the Herald on a freelance basis, advising them on international coverage. David isn't present, but he doesn't need to be. The story I'm about to tell will reach him soon enough. Good morning, everyone, Sarah says as the meeting begins. We've got a busy news day ahead of us. Michael, she uses my assumed name without any recognition of irony. I believe you have something for us? I stand up slowly, savoring the moment. In my briefcase are printouts of every piece of evidence I've gathered over the past 3 years. Audio transcripts, photographs, witness statements, leaked documents. Everything needed to expose the truth about what happened in Kandahar and what's been covered up ever since. I do, I say, opening the briefcase. It's a story about Afghanistan, about war correspondents who abandon their colleagues and then build their careers on fabricated heroism. Sarah's expression doesn't change, but I see Marcus stiffen in his chair. Neither of them recognizes me yet. My appearance has changed too much, and they believe Michael Cross is safely dead and buried. But they're about to learn that some truths refuse to stay buried. I begin distributing copies of my story, watching their faces as they read the headline, Blood and Ink, How 3 War Correspondents Built Pulitzer Prize Careers on a Colleague's Abandonment and the Suppression of War Crimes Evidence. The byline reads, By Michael Cross, From Beyond the Grave. Sarah drops her copy. Marcus goes pale. Around the conference table, other editors and reporters begin reading with growing amazement and horror. This is impossible, Sarah whispers. Michael Cross is dead. We saw him die. I smile, pulling off the beard that's hidden my identity for 3 years. Hello, Sarah, I say, in the voice she abandoned in Afghanistan. Miss me? The room erupts in chaos. Sarah is on her feet, shouting that this is some kind of sick joke. Marcus is backing toward the door. Other staff members are pulling out phones, calling editors, trying to process what they're witnessing. But I remain calm, because this moment, the moment of revelation, of resurrection, of reckoning, is what I've been planning for 3 years. Sit down, Sarah, I say quietly. We have a lot to discuss. Starting with why you left me to die in Kandahar and then used my death to win a Pulitzer Prize. The story I tell over the next hour destroys 3 careers and exposes a war crimes cover-up that reaches the highest levels of the Pentagon. By the end of the day, Sarah Chen will be fired from the Herald. Marcus Rodriguez will lose his CNN contract and face a publisher's lawsuit over his book deal. David Walsh's consulting firm will collapse when clients learn their crisis management expert built his reputation on fabricated heroism. The Pulitzer Prize will be revoked, the war crimes story will finally be published, and Michael Cross will rise from the dead to claim his place among the living. But revenge, I'm learning, tastes different than I expected. It's not the sweet satisfaction I imagined during 3 years of planning. It's bitter and hollow, tinged with the knowledge that Rashid is still dead, that the civilians killed in those drone strikes are still dead, that no amount of professional destruction can undo the betrayal in that compound outside Kandahar. Still, as I watch Sarah Chen clean out her office, as I see Marcus Rodriguez's book disappear from store shelves, as I read David Walsh's public apology for errors in judgment during a traumatic period, I feel something that might be justice. They built their careers on my blood and ink. Today, I'm taking both back. Michael Cross was supposed to be dead. Instead, he's very much alive, and he has stories to tell. Starting with the one about 3 colleagues who thought they could bury the truth along with the man who discovered it. Some graves, it turns out, are shallower than they appear, and some truths refuse to stay buried, no matter how many Pulitzer Prizes are built on top of them. The dead, when properly motivated, make very effective journalists. And I have a lot more stories to tell.
Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, do well to click like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more interesting revenge stories. See you on my next video. Bye.